So I'm the executive director of FiberShed. My name is Rebecca Burgess. We are a nonprofit organization. We operate in 54 counties in north central California. And our focus has been on developing regional supply chains. So our idea of the circular economy is expressed here, that all the textiles that we create will come from soils that are being regenerated. And these textiles will have the capacity to return to those same soils, if not a soil base nearby. And that all of the systems of value production will be within that place to develop meaningful livelihoods for communities. So the jacket I'm wearing is an expression of that. It's dyed in Rubia tinctorium, a dye plant that I grow in my backyard. It was grown, woven, and sewn within my fiber shed. And it has Lonnie Estelle's wool, Robin Lyons wool, and it was woven by Ryan Houston, a new mill in our community, and sewn by a colleague, Daniel DeSanto. So a lot of the clothing that I wore for a year, actually all the clothing I wore for 1 year the dyes, the labor, and the fiber were all grown within 150-mile radius of my front door. So I met all the people in that video when I was trying to challenge myself to dress locally. I met Jean Neer when she was 98 years old. I met Robert and Jamie before they had any children. They had just gotten married. I've met all these people, and they mean so much to my life because they dressed me, and they kept me warm and sheltered. And so what I'm trying to explore here is how do we expand these meaningful relationships to all of you, to have that experience of the food system, the slow food system and the slow fashion system. How do we pair livelihood, local economy, the regeneration of our soils and our lives all into some stacked function project? So today you're going to hear a pilot project that actually brings our place together with the largest textile corporation in the world to help us amplify our message and to help actually highlight all the work of the people who are here. We'll do that through introductions. We are going to do slides, and I have to say next slide because I don't have a slide turner. So next slide. We'll explore a little bit about this work that FiberShed does on climate beneficial. Climate beneficial, we don't use the term regenerative yet because a lot of the systems, like in California, we've lost 50% of the carbon in our rangeland systems. Regenerative to me means you're giving back more than you're taking. And I don't honestly think that our agriculture systems are fully at that place of replenished and replenishing themselves fully yet. We have just a journey, and I'm on the path. So I use the term climate beneficial because we have the science to back up that we are reducing emissions, and we are in some cases creating net sinks on these agricultural working lands. So we use the term climate beneficial, and we base that off of practices. This is a compost application on croplands. This is one example. Next slide. This is a shelter belt, a pollinator corridor that we have worked on with Lonnie Estelle. It's a 1-mile pollinator corridor in Windbreak at her ranch. And there's 35 other practices that we work on, and we provide some technical assistance ourselves, but we've partnered with policymakers. In California, we helped create a Healthy Soils initiative, and we funded Healthy Soils to the tune of $15 million this coming year through scientists that we work with at Berkeley, also Amelie Godin, who you saw at UC Davis. And we also work with technical service providers through the resource conservation districts. We use Farm Bill funding, and we pair that with private funding. So we have a lot of mechanisms to make sure we're empowering people on the landscape, not just saying, here, go be regenerative, but let's give you the actual mechanisms, the funding, the technical service, and let's use existing infrastructure where possible. There is Farm Bill funding that can be effective. Let's use it for good. So that's kind of our approach, trying not to reinvent the wheel too much. So I will have everyone on this panel. We have Lonnie Estelle, we have Carol Hsu from the North Face, and Keith Postian from CSU, who helps make climate beneficial a reality. So we're going to explore this pilot, and they're each going to introduce themselves as a starting point. So we'll go with Keith. Your slides are up next. That's okay.
Yeah, go ahead and advance one. So yeah, I'm a professor in soil and crop science at Colorado State up the road. My background and interest is as a soil ecologist, and a lot of my work is really trying to better understand soil organic matter dynamics in a deep sense, in managed systems and also greenhouse gas emissions. And I guess next slide. Kind of at a really high level. So we have a lot of talk about, here regenerative agriculture and conservation practices, but it really can be something that can be extremely significant in terms of mitigating climate change. And so it's not just a bunch of old and young hippies here in Boulder that believe in this stuff, but over here, so a lot of you have heard about the 1.5 degree report that came out recently, but there's also a National Academies of Sciences publication here. And so it really is, it's robust science to say that that we have the capabilities of rebuilding our soils, of making a significant carbon sink there that can really help in the drawdown that we need to do to try to meet the Paris kind of goals in terms of mitigating the worst amount of greenhouse warming. Next slide. So how are we going to do that? How are we going to get the farmers and ranchers? They're going to be the folks that have to do the work, right? There's been a lot of talk here about that, and we got farmers and ranchers in the audience, and I think it really is. It's about incentivizing for them. It's about rewarding for good stewardship. It's about helping to de-risk their changes in management that they have to do. So one of the earlier speakers was talking about that. There's different ways of doing it. Okay, government programs, that can help. Market-based incentives are there, things, carbon offset markets, et cetera. They're, haven't really taken off in a big way, but perhaps beginning to. And then I think what we're talking about here a lot is the sustainable supply chain, looking at the demand side and how we can utilize that to incentivize farmers to have these practices. Next slide. So what we do and what I do in my group is develop a quantification tool called Comet Farm, stands for Carbon Management Evaluation Tool originally. And it basically does a full within farm gate greenhouse gas accounting. It uses it implements the USDA's official entity scale greenhouse gas guidelines published 2014. It integrates a lot of spatial databases, remote sensing, field measurements, sophisticated models into a package that is really designed. It's open access, it's on the web, it's free to use. It's really designed that anybody can use it. So just some examples of, or maybe next slide shows you just kind of a quick glance of how it looks. You can go in, you can register, you can fly into your field, you can outline, or your farm, you outline your field, you can specify your management, you can, there's a whole bunch of stuff you can do. Next slide. What we're doing, so today, example, Rebecca and her group have been using the tool as part of the fiber shed in the carbon farming, so looking at North Face. We've also done a little work with Ben & Jerry's. A major client is, USDA wants to be able to quantify what the CRP program, what EQIP potentially is doing in terms of greenhouse gases. We've worked for a number of years with folks in California, the Marine Carbon program. The Healthy Soils Initiative in California is a policy that now uses a Comet-derived tool called the Comet Planner as part of the process of enrolling in that. Some of the methods that are in here and the tools are used in some of the carbon offset protocols and things like that with Climate Action Reserve, American Carbon Registry, do a lot of stuff educationally. I think final slide coming up. And really the whole philosophy that I have here is that it's the people on the landscape, it's the farmers and ranchers that are going to have to do the work to make this happen. And we're trying to provide tools that they can use, that they're associated, their crop consultants, the sustainability directors at companies, others can really get the best science there, to bring in all this information that's out there and make it possible then for farmers to participate in ecosystem services markets, to sustainable supply chains, et cetera. So that's what we're about. Thanks.
Thank you, Keith. Wonderful. And Carol, would you like to introduce next?
Great. So my name is Carol Hsu, and I'm the Sustainability Manager at the North Face. I had the privilege of working on the Climate Beneficial Wool project with Rebecca and Lonnie. I come from the sustainable design world. I don't think I ever told you, Rebecca, but in my sustainable fashion world, you were like my celebrity. So when I got to work on this project with you, it was amazing.
I didn't know that.
Next slide.
Wow. Cool.
So just to give you all some background into how we approach sustainability and responsibility at our company, we have 3 pillars: products, places, and people, which is probably very familiar to you all. Places encompasses our conservation work. So working with amazing organizations like the Conservation Alliance, also advocating for public lands. Under people, we have our Explore Fund program, which is dedicated to getting more people outside, especially people who don't have access to the outdoors. And then under products, that covers things like our Cali Wool Beanie, which you see there. And we take a really holistic approach to products. So we're also looking at how we can keep our products in use. We create really high-performing technical gear, and that should have a long lifetime with it. So in addition to our warranty, we also sell our own used products on the NorthFaceRenewed.com. And next slide. So when Rebecca approached us, I think in 2016, about climate beneficial wool, we were really excited to work with her again. In 2014, we had created a backyard hoodie. Our goal was to create a hoodie within 150 miles of our headquarters, which we actually ultimately failed at because we couldn't get the cotton processed in California. But working with Rebecca and FiberShed to set up an American cotton supply chain in California was an amazing process for us. And so when she came to us with this amazing wool, we thought, well, yeah, we'll take on this challenge. And so we set up these 2 separate supply chains, which I'll get into more later. But the supply chain planning part was really the hardest part for us because we're a really large global company. We have a very large global supply chain. And believe it or not, it's actually difficult for us to come up with American partners and suppliers that we can work with. So this was a labor of love, and we have some great products as an output. Next slide. So we came up with a jacket just this past fall. This is Lonnie's coat right here. It's made in the USA from Lonnie's wool. The fabric is woven in Connecticut. It's actually sewn like 6 miles from our headquarters, which is amazing. And we also have a beanie and the scarf that Lonnie and I are both wearing. And one thing we realized when we came out with this collection was that we really had to do a lot of consumer education because carbon farming, climate beneficial, those are complicated science things that our average consumer doesn't understand. And to be honest, these products are made in the USA. They're more expensive than some of our other products. And so we had to communicate that extra value to our consumers. We came up with this graphic, which we have on our hang tags. And it's based off of FiberShed's infographic for their carbon cycle. I actually hand drew a modified cycle for our marketing team. They were like, no, you have to cut this down by a lot. So we did a couple of revisions, and our marketing team is a great test case for us to see if consumers will understand the graphic. So this is ultimately what we came up with to talk to our consumers about climate beneficial wool.
We like it. Thank you, Carol. And Lonnie, would you like to introduce yourself?
So, next slide. Hi, I'm Lonnie Estelle, and you've heard a little bit about me and my work. This is a photograph of our ranch. We're in northeastern California, the high desert. We have cattle, sheep. We do grow hay, which is rarely sold. Everything that we grow goes back into our sheep and our cattle right there on the ranch. These sheep that you see have been up in the mountains grazing all year pretty much, and this was September, so they just come back down onto the pivot aftermath. So like when we grow alfalfa, then the sheep come back. It's a whole in the fall and up through winter, and then in December they're put back out on the range, and they'll stay out again until the following September. So it's the old way range operation where the sheep herders follow the sheep year-round. They walk about a 90-mile, 180-mile round trip every year. And they're happily on the they just got turned out and they were thrilled. That beautiful green feed. Next slide. I have shifted my focus in the last couple of years from being on the ground at the ranch to managing the whole wool clip. So that is all the wool that we produce for the year. And this is a picture of the raw wool at shearing time. And then this is the next step, which is comb top. And that was done at Chargeurs, which she showed on her graphic. And then our finished product. It takes about 15 months from shearing to product release. And in the textile world, that's
Ages.
Ages and ages, yeah, it's forever. And a speaker earlier talked about turning the supply chain upside down, and we're really doing that with this product. And fabric, I'm also making fabric, and that is totally foreign to a designer to start with the fabric and end with the garment. They make their design first, and then they search out their supply. So by trying to push this idea of regenerative agriculture, we are asking a lot from the supply chain. Next slide. I also have my own little yarn shop and a fledgling yarn line called Lonnie's Lana Fine Rambouillet Wool. This is my yarn shop, which I share. It's been there 18 years, and I still share the space with the owner. She's fantastic. I produce yarn, comb top, and then fabric, which you see down below. And several of the fashions last night were using my wool and the fabric from that. Thank you.
So we have time for a few questions, and I'd love to start. We haven't talked about the actual framework for climate beneficial, so through the Q&A, we'll answer what that climate beneficial framework is to elucidate that for you more. And we'll start through describing how it functions for those here. So Lonnie, we'll start with you. If you could describe how you were introduced to carbon farming and what were your first steps even before you implemented your first practice.
I was introduced through a cold call with Rebecca. She calls North Face, she calls producers.
Very persuasive.
That's how she's become who she is. She's amazing. We talked for 45 minutes, and that led to my participation in the annual Wool Symposium that FiberShed puts on. And at that event, we talked further. We spent some time, and ended up, we scheduled a whole team to come up to the ranch and talk about a carbon farm plan and the possibility of doing that on the ranch. And sitting down with that team, which included Dr. Jeff Creek with the Carbon Cycle Institute and representatives from the NRCS, Natural Resource Conservation District, FiberShed, we came up with a list of practices that we wanted to do. And Dr. Creek put it like this. He says, don't make it complicated. Just any conservation work that you've ever wanted to do on the ranch, let's just throw it out there. What have you wanted to do? What have you wanted to do, but you didn't have the funding to do, didn't have the time to do? What are those practices? So we identified things like riparian management, better grazing management. We wanted to take some areas where the sheep and the cattle are drinking out of the creek and put them onto wells for that riparian management. And a couple that we're doing, we're going to talk about the couple we're doing later, I think.
Your windbreaks.
Yeah.
7 miles of windbreaks.
The 7 miles of, yeah. The windbreaks. So all these things went into the plan. And then after we said what we wanted to do, Jeff said, okay, now if money was no object and you could do anything you want, what else would you do? And so he challenged us to go to the next step and come up with more projects. And we just made a list. And that's where our carbon farm plan started for us. And then there was maybe a follow-up. There was a ton of baseline work that we did, just establishing soil tests, grazing management, just baseline. Where are you at now?
And then the goals can be set from baseline soil sampling. And Dr. Jeff Creek set goals for up to 6% soil organic carbon in croplands. So it's going to take a lot of compost and a lot of applications to help get those croplands to those levels. But it's all part of these aspirational goals. And that's the question you ask. You ask, what are the carbon capture opportunities on this land? You don't withhold because it might not fit in that framework or this budget. You just ask that question. And that's when the floodgates of opportunity start coming forth. So then maybe you could describe after that aspirational point, what was the first practice that you implemented, and then just describe your ongoing commitment to this work.
Okay, so the first practice was compost application because that was the most value for our time and our money. And we got a jump start on that because the North Face saw the value in what we were doing, and they gave us a $10,000 grant to start it, which was huge, not only in the money, because it didn't come close to paying for that initial boost, but it said, okay, if a company like North Face believes in what we're doing, there's got to be something to this. So it was a huge emotional boost in addition to just the money, which is always needed, necessary part of the equation. We've done a couple other practices, but the one we've just got really excited about, got in the ground, was 4,950 feet of shelter belt plants. So these not just trees, monoculture, it's trees, it's shrubs, it's forbs, it's grasses, pollinators. So it's going to totally change a really wide open area that does not have any trees in it at all in Nevada, California, right on the border. It's going to change that landscape dramatically over the years, and we're really excited to see how that's going to turn out and what it's going to look like generationally.
Over 60 species, all for pollination primarily and wind protection. Some animal welfare components were built in as well to provide shade for animals. And on the leeward side of the windbreak, there's 30% less erosion. So you have all these stacked functions with one practice that was co-paid for by the North Face's ongoing commitment to the program, and they didn't, and Carol will get into this, but they didn't just put up the initial money to inspire it, but they pay ongoing monies, not just a price premium, small price premium for the wool. The wool market's skyrocketing right now, so the premium's kind of matching the markets almost, but there's an ongoing corporate social responsibility piece that Carol will add to, that you match these public dollars from the Farm Bill with private dollars, and you start to really see how these things can land, like a mile of pollinator corridor in saline high pH soils. And we were able to also have the NRCS do a lot of the soil tests for us as well and help us determine how high is the pH, what will survive, what 60 native plants will go in here. So just to be tactical about all the logistics that go into that. And then just to speak to one last piece, what is it beyond the climate beneficial component? Could you describe what carbon farming has come to mean to you at this point in the game?
It's given me a different perspective on how we farm. And so we were looking at carbon sequestration as something that's very important and key to what we do, and it affects every decision that we make now instead of, well, not even really being aware of it or thinking of it a couple years ago.
Thank you. Yeah. All right, we could transition to Carol, and I'm going to ask you a two-part question. Can you describe your, at this point in the game, approach that the North Face is taking with soil health as a strategy for ameliorating climate change within your supply chain?
Yeah, so under our products pillar, our aspiration is to create the highest performing products that have an ever smaller footprint on our planet. And so climate beneficial wool to us is the perfect opportunity to work towards that goal. You know, a lot of times we're working on using more recycled polyester, more organic cotton, but climate beneficial wool is a material that is actually restoring soil health. And so that's a very rare opportunity for us to be putting that into a product. And we are committed to supporting this work. And so, like Rebecca said, we donate to the Carbon Fund every season that we use the wool based on our usage, because we really want to support the implementation of carbon farming practices on Lonnie's ranch. And then We also see education as a really important part of our overall strategy, because we know our consumers are asking for more responsible and sustainably made products, and we want to make sure that they're educated on what that actually is and what that means. And carbon farming is such a complex issue. We see it as our responsibility to help kind of share the knowledge and spread it amongst, those that, as Edward said earlier, there's the 3 to 5% of customers who specifically seek out products for an environmental or responsible reason. We have a lot of customers who aren't necessarily as aware of that, and so we have a responsibility, an even bigger one, I think, to make sure those customers are getting the message.
Thank you. And then could you say anything about the efficacy of wool? I brought your boardroom a clump of wool in a ball mason jar, and I remember that was my offer. It wasn't a textile.
Yeah.
And so you've come to learn about this fiber as I had learned to love it, and maybe you could speak to a little bit about wool as a fiber.
Yeah, wool is just, we are a performance company. We make technical gear to get people outside, climbing Everest or skiing locally here. And wool just has so many amazing properties, but also it's an incredibly durable material. I was at Textile Exchange listening to a panel on wool LCAs because there's a little bit of controversy over the LCA information that's associated with wool. And one of the speakers was talking about how we need to take into account just the usage of wool. Those products end up being reused at a higher percentage than other fibers. There was a statistic from used clothing stores, I think in Norway or somewhere in Scandinavia, that showed that a higher percentage of those garments were being reused. And so for us, where we have a lifetime warranty on our products, if anything ever happens to this coat, we'll repair it for you, and we want to keep this coat in use as long as possible.
Thank you. And I think we have 1 minute. Is that right? Okay, so Keith, when we did the aspirational list of practices on Lonnie's Carbon Farm Plan, and the COMET planner and the tool allowed us to understand that the wool coming off the sheep, every pound of wool represented 6 to 9 pounds of carbon sunk into that range. So it came off the land, the wool came off the land in this, with this net negative emission impact. And so, as we're trying to figure out the modeling systems that help us just inform the work, could you help describe to the audience in the last moments what kind of model COMET is? I'm so sorry to give you that complex question, but maybe just environmental systems versus empirical.
So it's a platform, really, and I would say it's a tool, it's a platform. It integrates a huge amount of spatial data, observational data, but and sophisticated models, including process-based models that actually are dynamic models as opposed to kind of a fairly simple, empirical index or something like that. So what we're really trying to do is bring the best possible science, but put it in a form that it's usable by non-experts. And the whole idea really is quantification is key, and quantification that's rigorous and that's trusted, that's transparent, is really key to getting buy-in for any of these kind of policies. But we've got to do it at, with as low transactional costs as possible as well. So, we're really trying to thread the needle there and provide the best science, but make it usable by non-experts without it costing a ton of money to do your quantification. So that's, I think, the philosophy behind it.
And just a reference point, the resource conservation districts throughout the United States, but there's 98 of them in California, are all being trained to use COMET. So you could say the light duty auditing process for developing the climate metrics or the carbon metrics can be done for free and as part of a public service to a rancher from a technical service provider that's already been on the land, some of these institutions, since the Dust Bowl. So again, just referencing how we're merging the latest science with the ongoing work of the old institutions with the work to regenerate soils and how these all come together to inform than a sustainable supply chain. So
can
yes.
I'll throw in one final thing. So it's not only California. We're working, for example, with Phil Taylor here in Colorado and Mad Agriculture, wanting to use the tools to also, accomplish some of the same things here in our agricultural systems, make them more environmentally sound, let them contribute to climate change mitigation, soil health, and all the good stuff that we all want to do here.
Thank you so much.
All right, thank you so much. Woo!